Today is July 11th, 2007. I am Jessica Clark. It is a pleasure to conduct this interview for the Dakota Memories Oral History Project in Lair, North Dakota. To start with, can you please state your full name?
My full age?
Full name. Your name.
Oh, either Zimmerman, Koepplin,
Okay. Koepplin, that's how you pronounce it. Koepplin.
Koepplin,
Okay. And where were you born?
in Lair, North Dakota, on a farm about 8.5 miles southeast.
And when?
January 14, 1915.
Did you ever hear a story about your birth?
Well, my brother used to tease me. He said, well, on the 14th we'll have a blizzard because it's Ida's birthday. Usually we had bad weather during that time of the year, the middle of January.
What was the weather like back then?
I didn't get you.
What was the weather like back then?
Well, it was usually snowing and blizzarding and cold, windy.
Can you share one of your earliest childhood memories?
Yeah, when I was 3 years old, a younger brother was born. And I remember they brought a lady to the house, my dad did. And then they sent my older sister and me to the garden. So we had all kinds of fruit in the garden, like gooseberries and joneberries. And so we spent some time in the garden. And then when we came back to the house, they showed us the baby. Well, of course, I didn't know where the baby came from. And they said we had a baby brother, and they named him Jacob.
How old were you about then?
I can't hear you.
How old were you?
I was 3 years old.
3. When you were a kid, what type of games did you play?
Oh, we played Pom Pom Pull Away and Captain something, and played ball and tag, yeah, different things like that.
Can you tell me what Pump Pump Pull Away was?
Oh, we had there was a outhouse or a shed, and we'd throw the ball over that shed, and then you would call and say, "Pom Pom Pull Away," and then you throw the ball, and then they had to catch it on the other side, and they'd come around, and then somebody else would have to throw again, and so that was Pom Pom Pull Away.
And when you say ball, is that like baseball?
It was like a volleyball or something like that.
What other types of games did you play?
Oh, we used to play wolf and sheep, and the sheep would go and hide, and then the captain of the game would go with the wolf, and then they'd have to give us some time to hide behind a hill or someplace, and then they would come looking for us.
So were these games that you played at school or on the
Yes,
farm?
in school.
At school. Who would you play with? Would all the children play? Or?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. What were some games that you would play indoors?
Oh, we had checkers, and we played rook and dominoes, and of course we had dolls, played with dolls, and we had little cradles and clothes to dress them up in. And
Did you make your dolls' clothes or did you buy them?
No, my mother would make them for us.
Do you know where you learned how to play the games like Wolf and Sheep? Like, were they taught to you by somebody?
Well, when you're in school, you'd go along with the crowd, and you learned what the object of the game was.
Did you play baseball when you were growing up?
Yeah, we played baseball also.
Did you have equipment? Like, did you have a bat and a glove, or
Yeah, we had a bat and a glove where somebody would bring it from home.
were these things that you played at recess or the noon hour, or?
During noon hour, mostly recess only had 15 minutes.
So what would you do during recess?
Oh, probably go to the outhouse and,
How far was the outhouse from the schoolhouse?
oh, just a little ways.
Okay.
Wasn't very far.
What type of games would you play in the winter time?
Well, I don't really remember what we did. I think we pretty much played them year-round, those games.
Did you ever go ice skating as a kid?
Yes, we had a lake right below the hill, below the schoolhouse, and some of the boys would have skates, and they knew how to skate real well. So they'd say, well, come hang on to me, I'll give you a ride. And you'd hang on to them and they'd skate and they'd pull you along.
So did you ever have your own ice skates?
No, I never owned any.
How about sledding? Did you ever go sledding?
We went sledding. Somebody would bring a sled, or we went sledding at home too. That's what we usually did in the evening after supper. We'd go out and go sledding.
Would the adults ever play with you, like your parents?
Hmm?
Would your parents ever play with you?
No, they never. I don't remember them ever playing with us.
Let's see here. Did your parents your parents were from Russia, right?
Yes, they were from Bessarabia, Russia.
Did your parents ever teach you any games from Russia?
No. They were too busy working. They didn't take time for games.
Besides dolls, did you have any other types of toys as a little girl?
We used to play a game, my brother and I, with a button. You'd pull a thread through it and you'd pull it. And it would go around and round. But I wouldn't know how that was played anymore. But I remember you'd sit opposite each other and you'd have a string that reached from one to the other. And you played this with your hands. You pulled that string and it had some kind of a suction there. And it would go round and round.
Who did you play with when you were growing up?
I had a brother that was 3 years younger and a brother that was 3 years older.
What were their names?
My younger brother was Jacob, and the older brother was Oscar.
So were you the only girl in the family?
No, I had two sisters. I had one sister that was 5 years older, and I had one sister that was 10 years older.
Okay. Did they ever play with you?
Well, the one that was 5 years older than I, she would play with us, yeah.
The one that was 10 years older, did she kind of play a mothering role in your childhood?
Well, yes, our mother wasn't well. When I was I was born in January, and in March, my dad took her to Bismarck on the train. They had to come into town with the horse and sled, and they took the train to Bismarck, and she had a kidney removed. And of course, I was nursing her, and then she was sick. I couldn't nurse on her, so they had to wean me to a bottle, which was quite an ordeal, I think. And eventually, my dad had to bring me home, so he brought me home on the train. And I suppose I cried and cried. And he took me, what turned out to be my husband's aunt, who had a daughter, Ida Crane, at Jamestown. And she was my age, and she was nursing her. So she nursed both of us for a while until they got me weaned to a bottle. And then he took me to my uncles and aunts, and I lived with them for a year because my mother wasn't well enough to take care of me, and my sister was only 10 years old. She didn't really know how to take care of a baby, and so I lived with them for a year until they took me home again.
So did your mom get better at that point?
Yeah, she got better, but she was never, like, she couldn't milk cows or things like that because when she'd sit so low on the stool, she had a hard time getting up because of her back. And then later, she developed diabetes. So she was at Eureka at the hospital. They diagnosed that she was diabetic. And when she was ready to come home, my dad took me along, and then Dr. Gertis at Eureka showed me how to give her insulin shots and also how to test her urine. They had some little tubes, and you had to put that, there was amounts on there, figures that you had to know how much sugar she had. So according to that, you gave her her insulin shots. I was only 11 years old. To this day, I wonder how I could do that, but I did it. From 11 until, well, she died when I was 16.
How did she die?
Well, it was the last week in March, and we had a blizzard like I don't think we ever had a worse one. And everything was at a standstill. There were no trains, there were no travel whatsoever, and we run out of insulin. So she went into a coma, and she developed pneumonia. And she started on a Monday, and by Sunday she died then. I remember waking up at night, it was on a Saturday night, and then she was talking, and she told us what would happen. She said that I had a son, she had a son who was in the ministry, and he lived in Pennsylvania. And then she said, David will come home, but his wife won't be coming. And Ida will have cooked a big kettle of vegetable soup. And she said different things that took place after she was gone. And we had a house full of company on that Sunday. I remember feeding them all. And then she passed away. Her funeral was on a Good Friday then.
Do you remember her funeral?
Oh, yes.
What was that like?
I thought the worst thing was when the ground was froze, when they let you stay there and they threw that frozen ground down on the box that her coffin was in. And I thought it was just horrible when I heard those chunks of frozen dirt go down on her casket and box. And that just hounded me.
What was a funeral like back then? Like how would they conduct a funeral?
Well, in those days they used to have flower girls. They had girls that would carry the flowers in as they brought the casket into the church. They would follow well, first would be the minister and then the family, and then the flower girls, and then the family would walk into church. And it was in a country church out in the country.
Do you remember the name of the church?
Hmm?
Do you remember the name of the church?
It was the Chores station. It was a Baptist church.
Where did they lay her to rest? Where is she buried at?
Well, she was buried there, but in later years, after my dad had passed away, then we had the undertaker dig him up and bring him to the Lair City Cemetery, because there was no road to get to that cemetery. There just hardly no way to get there. You almost had to walk to get there. So the family decided to bring him into the city cemetery, and most of us pitched in to help pay for it. And so they're buried at the Lair City Cemetery.
How old were you when your father died?
My father had gone down, they lived in Lair, and he had gone downtown. My younger brother was going to school in Allendale, and they usually sent food. He did light housekeeping. He stayed at an elevator. He had a couch there that he slept on and did light housekeeping. So they usually, when there were other families that sent their children to Allendale, and then they would take turns, and whoever would go down there or come home, and they would take food along back for those others. So he went down there to get a grocery box, and they were going to pack food in it for him. And when he came in, he had snow on his shoes, and he slipped and he fell down the basement backwards, and he broke his neck. So my husband and I didn't live here at the time. We lived up 25 miles west of Carrington by a little town named Heaton, North Dakota. We lived about 4 miles south of there on a farm. And the neighbor came and brought us this telegram. And the telegram said, "Father is dead, come home at once." And Ben's dad had been sick. He had had a heart condition. And first we thought, well, that was him, but my brother had signed it. I said, that can't be your brother, your dad, that's my dad. Oh, what could have happened? We had no telephone. So we got the neighbors to do our chores. And another neighbor, they had school buses there that were enclosed, and they had little heaters in them. So this neighbor took us into town, and we took the train to Carrington. And from Carrington, we took the bus to Jamestown, and we had to spend the night there. And then the next day, we took the bus to Edgeley, and then my brother and my brother-in-law met us there. We had so much snow up our way, but they didn't have that much snow around here. So they could drive with cars. Up there, you couldn't. It was impossible. So then we came home for the funeral. And they had a short service in the house first, and then they took him to church. And I had a stepmother after my mother had passed away. My dad, she died in March, and in November he remarried another lady from Linton, North Dakota,
What was her name?
Christine Schmier.
How did he meet her?
Well, he had gone to some church doings at Eureka, and somebody that he knew from Linton introduced him to her, and they got him acquainted. And then we had Mission Fest in our church one Sunday, and then somebody brought her over. And then she went home with us after church. And I wondered about that. Well, then she slept with me that night. And then the next day, my uncle and aunt came over to the farm. And then they and my dad and this lady went to Ashley to the courthouse and got their license. And then in the evening, they were married in the Baptist church here in Lair. It was pretty hard for us kids, my brothers and I, to witness that, to have somebody else take our mother's place.
What type of a person was your mother?
Very timid and very quiet. She didn't talk much. And she wasn't well, so maybe when she was younger and was healthy, she probably talked more. But as I got to know her, she was very timid and cried a lot. And I never got a spanking from her. She was always soft-spoken and very gentle.
Were you close to her when she was alive?
Oh, yes, because I had to take care of her in bed. Made my first bread dough I made in front of the bed. I took all the ingredients in there, and I had to get in there with my hands to make it. And then she would reach over and say, "Oh, you have to add a little more flour. It's a little sticky yet." That's how I learned to make my first bread dough.
How about your father? What type of a person was he?
Well, he was very strict in his ways. He had been in the Russian army. He was in the Russian-Japanese War. And he came home with my uncle, my mother's brother, Gottlieb Wall from Lent, Washington. He came home with him on furlough, and he met my mother. And then after he got out of the service, they got married.
So your parents weren't married when they came over from Russia?
Oh yes, they brought 6 children
Oh,
along.
really?
They came over in 1910, and they had 6 children then. This sister that's 5 years older than I, she was only a year old. They came over on June 10th, and her birthday was June 3rd, so she was only a year old.
So what happened to the children that came over with your parents?
Hmm?
What happened to all the children that came over with your parents?
Well, the oldest son, Gottlieb, was 13, and he had pink eye, so he had to stay over in Germany. He wasn't allowed to get on the ship. So he and some other people that had some illness of some kind that they weren't allowed to board came over by themselves later. And my dad had to go bonds for him, make sure that his way would be paid. So it was quite an ordeal for a 13-year-old boy to come over by himself. They said my mother was very seasick on the ship.
Did your parents ever talk about why they left Russia?
Well, he didn't want any of his sons to have to go in the army like he had to. And when they had first, generations back, had first moved to Russia, they were told that they would never have to serve in the army, but that changed. They had to. My dad served in the army, and so did my uncle and other uncles that were killed there. So he didn't want any of his sons to ever have to serve in the army there like he had.
Your older sister, who's 10 years older, what's her name?
Amelia.
Amelia. So Amelia and Gottlieb were two of the five children, or six, what, five children?
Six.
6 children they had.
Mm-hmm.
What else happened to the other children?
Well, they all lived at home with the parents.
Do you need some water? Are you okay?
It's okay.
Okay. Did your parents ever talk about what life was like in Russia?
Oh, yeah, they said it was very much nicer than here. They talked about, Mother said, there we had grapes and we had peach trees and we had all kinds of fruit. And here we have nothing like that. And they had a nice home there. And our home wasn't much of anything. And she always missed her home over there because must have been much nicer.
Did they leave a lot of family back in Russia?
Oh, yeah. They left their parents and brothers and sisters, which they never got to see again.
Did they stay in contact with letters?
Oh, yes, they wrote letters. Yeah, but it always took a long time, maybe 2-3 weeks for a letter to get here or to get over there.
So, did your parents speak Russian?
My dad could. When he went to town, there were some people up north of town that were Russian. And when he'd meet up with them, they would have a Russian conversation.
So, how many children are in your family then?
There were 9 of us. 3 of us were born in the United States. And then my dad would often make the remark, those are my Americans. The rest of them, he had to become a citizen. Well, through him, the rest of the family got to be citizens also.
How long after he was in the United States did he become a citizen?
Well, about the same year.
Okay. So can you list all of your siblings, starting with the oldest and then to the youngest?
Mm-hmm. And there was Gottlieb and Israel and David, Amelia, Alex, Bertha, Oscar, myself, and Jacob.
So that's a big family.
Yeah, that's 9 of us.
Who were you closest to in your family?
Well, to my youngest brother and to my the one that's a little older than I.
What types of things would you do with your brothers?
Oh, I say we used to play board games,
Did anybody in your family play a musical instrument?
My dad played the accordion, and my younger brother started playing when he was 5 years old. He could hardly see over the accordion, but he picked it up and played by ear, And my brother Israel took organ lessons, and they had one of these old-fashioned organs in the house. So he would sit and play the organ. I remember him playing When the Roll is Called Beyonder. he played that song until we were all, I guess, tired of it.
So while they would play the organ and the accordion, would anybody in the family sing?
Well, yeah, when they got company, he would play, and they would sing some of these old hymns from that they had memorized, you know. So he would play along, and they'd sing these old German hymns.
Did the family speak German at home?
Oh, all the time.
Did they have company over often?
Well, he had, my dad had two brothers living nearby, Gottlieb and Conrad, and they would visit back and forth a lot. That was like Delmer's grandfather.
What, Conrad or Gottlieb?
Gottlieb was Delmer's grandfather.
Okay. Where was your favorite place to play as a child?
Well, there was an attic in our house, and I would have my doll and my little cradle, my doll clothes up there, and after lunch, well, I'd go up there and play with my doll. I remember I was maybe 5 years old, and my mother usually napped after lunch, and I went up the attic, and then I got this notion that I should go to school. So I took off and went to school all by myself and came home with my sister and my brother. When they returned home from school, my mother hadn't even missed me. She thought I was up in the attic playing. But when I got to school, I opened the outside door, and then the teacher heard something, and she came to the hallway and asked who I was and what I wanted. And I said, "Oh, I want to sit with my sister." So she let me come in, and I sat with my sister.
So did you like school?
Oh, I liked school.
How old were you when you actually started going to school?
Well, you had to be 7.
So you wanted to start 2 years earlier?
Yeah, I did.
Your doll that you talked about, do you remember when you got your doll?
My dad brought it home from town for my birthday. It had a red polka dot dress on.
Do you remember if you named your doll?
I don't remember that.
How about farm animals? Did you ever play with the farm animals?
Well, we had lots of cats around and dogs, but they weren't really playmates. They were just used them for gathering the cows up and things like that.
The cradle that you mentioned with your doll, did your dad make that or did he buy that?
I don't know. I think it had been made for some of the other girls before me.
How about hunting? Did you ever go hunting?
We used to trap gophers, my brothers and I. So we'd go out and trap gophers, and then the county paid us for the 2 cents a tail. So we would trap gophers. You could start in, I believe, in May sometime, or June, I don't remember. And then by the 4th of July, by the 1st of July, you had to turn them in to the courthouse, and they paid you a bounty for them, 2 cents apiece. So my dad, we'd put them in a paper bag, and he'd take them to the courthouse, and then that money was our money. And then we could spend that for the 4th of July celebration.
So what would you do for 4th of July?
Oh, we'd go like to Ashley, and they'd have a parade, and we'd get they would go to the store and buy some fresh bologna and bread and maybe a watermelon or something, and we'd have a picnic and eat.
So how far was Ashley from your farm?
14 miles.
How would you get there?
Oh, with a Model T Ford.
Would all the family go, or?
Yeah, everybody got to go.
What would you use your money to buy on the 4th of July?
Oh, well, ice cream cone because we never got to, and Cracker Jack. And we used to buy jawbreakers because they lasted quite a while, you know.
So how did they make ice cream back then?
Well, that was shipped in.
Did you make ice cream on the farm?
Oh, yes.
How did you do that?
Well, first we had a freezer that had a crank on it, and then in later years we had electric one and still have electric one.
How about fishing? Did you ever go fishing as a child?
No, I never went. My husband went fishing after we were married.
What other types, would they have games or festivities for the 4th of July?
Yeah, they had like foot races and things like that. And they'd have a dance in the evening.
What type of dances did they?
Oh, waltzes and two-steps and polkas and whatever.
Did you like dancing?
I did, but we weren't supposed to dance, you know. That was against our religion. But we would go anyhow when the folks didn't know about it.
What would happen if your parents found out that you were dancing?
Oh, they would scold us. And that was a sin.
So what were some of the other activities that were restricted when you were growing up?
Well, we weren't supposed to play with regular playing cards. But we could play with other games like rook and things like that.
Why didn't they want you dancing or playing with playing cards?
Well, that was a sin.
So it was against the church.
Hmm.
Do you know when that changed?
Well, I think the Baptists still rule that out.
Still? When you were growing up, were there any superstitions in your family?
Oh yeah, they they had these ladies that if you had a wart on your body somewhere, or I had a ringworm on top of my head one time. My hair was coming out, and my mother took me outside in the evening when the moon was at a certain stage, and she said some words, but what they were I'd never know. And my ringworm went away, and the same thing happened when you had warts. They would browch for them, you know.
So could anybody brauch, or was it just a certain person in the community?
Yeah, there was a lady in town that did it, and then there was a lady in Wichita that did it, and you could go to these people. And
Did you ever have to go to
well, I had to take my oldest daughter, Carol, to Wichita one time. She had several warts on her face, and well, she didn't want that, and I didn't either. So I took her to this lady, and she said something or did something, and they went away. And then after she had done her thing, she asked me if I'd like to know what she did, and I said yes. So she told me. She said, you can do that too. So she told me what the remedy was. So I did it for other people. My family used to tease me about it. They said, well, maybe Mom can do something with her hocus pocus.
So what would she have you do?
Well, I can't tell that to anybody.
How about any other types of superstitions that your family had?
Well, I don't know if there were any, really.
Okay. Were there any sayings or rhymes in your family that were repeated over and over again, or prayers?
Yeah. My dad used to say, don't get too excited like a little goat and jump too high because you could fall if you jump too high. He said it in German, of course. It meant it was translated different then.
Mm-hmm. Anything else that you can think of?
Or don't put all your eggs in one carton.
Okay. You started school when you were 7 years old?
Mm-hmm.
How far was the school from your
About
house?
1.25 miles.
How would you guys get there?
Well, we walked when the weather was nice, but when it was bad, they would take us with either the sled and horses or with the horses and buggy.
When you first started school, do you remember what you wanted to be when you...
Oh, I wanted to be a teacher.
So was it a one-room schoolhouse that you were attending?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
What was that like?
Oh, there were usually about 18, 19, 20 of us scholars, and there was lots of them. All the neighbors came there.
How would the teacher teach with all of those students at different levels?
Well, they like each grade would have their class, and you had to do a lot of memorizing. You had to memorize poems and things like that, and we'd put on Christmas programs in the evening, and the parents would come, put on spelling bees, and different schools would come and compete with us, and pie socials. You would bring pies, or basket social, and you'd bring a basket with goodies in it, and they'd have somebody auction them off, and then whoever auctioned it, you'd have to eat with that person. You always felt so embarrassed to eat with a boy. So that was things they did. And the county superintendent would come out maybe once a year and inspect and examine the school, and we'd have to have classes while he was there. And sometimes they had a nurse come and give us vaccinations. And
Do you remember what the name of the school was?
yeah, it was Lydia's School District #1.
When you were going to school, did you have the same teacher every year, or did it change?
No, they changed. Maybe one teacher would be there 2 years, and then she'd probably get married or something, or wouldn't come back, and then they'd hire somebody else.
Were they usually women?
Yes.
Did,
My first teacher was a man.
did you have a favorite teacher when you were...
Yes, some of them were nicer than others.
What made for a good teacher?
Well, they'd help you along in class instead of scold you if you didn't know it. Like I was in the 5th grade, and I think it was only myself and maybe one or two others. So then they promoted us to the 6th grade because so they wouldn't have to have so many classes. So I never took one of the grades. So I only went to school 7 years then.
So, when you started school, did you speak English?
No, not very much.
Was that hard for you to transition into it?
Well, my sister, used to talk English with us, so we had picked it up before we ever got to school.
Could you speak German at school?
No, no, you weren't allowed to. When we went outside for recess, when the teacher didn't hear us, we could speak it, but not when she heard us. We were restricted.
What would happen if she heard you?
Well, she'd make us stay in for recess.
The students that attended the school, were they primarily German Russian?
Yes, most of them.
Were there any other ethnicities in the schools?
No, they were mostly all German Russian.
How about religion? Were they mostly Baptist?
Yes. Then we all went to the same church.
So was Lair largely a German Russian Baptist community?
Well, there were other churches. There was a Methodist church, evangelical. Well, it was evangelical, then they joined with the Methodists. And there was a Lutheran church and a Seventh-day Adventist church. So it was, every church had a few.
How did the different religions interact with each other? Were they separate or did they get along pretty well together?
Oh, they got along.
What type of school supplies did you need to go to school back then?
Oh, you had to have a pencil and a ruler and crayons and a tablet, writing tablet. And that's about the main things,
What subjects were taught?
Well, reading, writing, arithmetic, and spelling, English, and hygiene, health, and history. And when you were in the 7th and 8th grade, you had to write state exams.
What was that like?
Well, the state exams were given in June, so a teacher that we'd had during the year would come and let us write those exams. And they got the papers from the state. They would come and and let us write the exams, and they'd mail them in, and then we'd hear in the mail whether we passed them or not.
Did you pass yours?
Yes, I passed them.
Were you a good student?
Yeah, I learned well.
What was your favorite subject to learn?
Reading. I love to read.
Did you have access to books when you were growing up?
Well, I could take home books from school, and my brother that was older was in the ministry and lived in Pennsylvania. He would send me some books sometimes. But I read everything I got a hold of.
Do you remember some of the books that you read when you were a kid?
Oh, like the first ones were like Little Red Riding Hood and Three Bears and some of those.
Did you have a lot of homework when you were growing up?
Oh, not too much. Sometimes you have to take something home and memorize, or had some spelling words that you had to rewrite in order to learn them.
So when you would take work home, would your older brothers and sisters help you or your parents?
Well, yeah, my parents didn't, but And your older brothers and sisters could help you along.
Your mom and dad spoke primarily German, right?
Yeah, they didn't speak any English.
They didn't speak any English.
Mm-mm.
Okay, so your dad could speak some Russian, but he never really.
Well, he had to learn a little English when he had to become a citizen. He had to learn the names of the presidents we had and so on.
We talked a little bit about what your mom was like, but what type of a person was your dad?
Well, he was kind of very strict, you know, and he wasn't as gentle as mother was. He was kind of rough.
Were you close to him?
Well, yeah, I never got a licking from him ever, because I knew I'd better behave. But and if he told you to do something, you knew you had to do it, because if you didn't, you would be afraid of a licking, you know.
How about your dad's second wife? What was she like?
She wasn't very nice.
Did she survive your dad after his fall? Like she was still alive after your dad's fall?
Yeah, she survived him, and she lived in their house for a couple of months, and then one night she had a truck come, and they loaded everything and hauled it to Lenton. So that was where all of our furniture and everything went from home, where nobody got anything. She took it all. And she moved it into her house at Lenton. And I don't know how long she had it, but anyhow, her house burned down and everything burned. So she didn't have nothing left either.
Did she have any kids with your father?
No.
So we're going to pick up looking at chores. So you want to tell us about some of the chores that you had to do as a young girl?
Well, we had to help milk cows. First of all, we had to walk out in the pasture and bring the cows home. And then we'd put them in the barn in the wintertime. Well, in the wintertime they were in the barn most of the time. But in the summertime we would put it, they had a fence that you had to put them in there, and then you sat outside and milked them in that. It was just kind of a, I don't know how big it was, but so there was enough room for all the cows, and and you'd have a stool and a pail and a 10-gallon can to pour your milk in, and so everybody was assigned so many cows to milk. So you'd milk them and you turn the cows out as you were through, and you'd separate your milk and feed your calves and hogs with the milk that was left. And
So how did you separate milk?
we had a cream separator.
How long would it take you to milk cows? How long would it take you to milk cows?
Oh, an hour maybe, depended on how many we were doing at the time. We usually milked quite a few cows, maybe 18, 20.
And how often did you milk cows?
Twice a day, morning and evening. We had to milk cows before we went to school in the morning, and again when we came home.
The summers can get really warm. How would you keep the milk cold after you?
Well, we had cellars. That was as cold as you could get it.
So besides milking cows and feeding the animals, what other types of chores did you do?
Well, we usually had chickens, so you'd have to feed the chickens and gather the eggs. In the spring of the year, you would set hens to hatch chickens. So when there would be a hen that was sitting on the nest, you would make a nest for her elsewhere, and you'd put about 18 eggs under her, and you'd have her sit on those eggs for 3 weeks, and then the baby chicks would hatch. Then you had to watch it and take them away from her and keep them in a. Usually we kept them in the kitchen in a box and with a flannel cloth or something in them, and kept them warm till they were all hatched, and then you would have the hen in a little barn with the chicks and feed them, and that's how you raised your chickens. And then we also had an incubator where they put eggs in to hatch. And we had ducks and geese, turkeys, so you did the same thing with all of them.
So what other types of animals did you have on the farm?
Well, sheep and goats and horses and cattle.
What would you do with all those animals?
Oh, they'd sell them. Like the sheep in the summertime, they would shear them for the wool, and then they would haul them either to Lair or Ashley, and they would sell them to the men that had the clothing store or the grocery store. And then usually that time of the year they would buy suits for the boys, and you got some clothes from that cheap money, old money, I mean. And like the cows, they would sell them, or the heifers or whatever. They sell in the fall of the year usually.
So did your father do any butchering himself?
Oh yes, they always butchered a couple hogs in the fall of the year, and then they would make some hams and put them in a brine in a crock, and they'd thaw them down for maybe 2 or 3 weeks, and then they would take them out and drain them and they had a smokehouse and they would smoke them. So that was very good meat, and they made their own sausage. And we would can a lot of that.
How would you make sausage?
Oh, they mixed it in a big wash tub. They sometimes they'd butcher a couple hogs and a critter yet, and then they mixed the pork and beef and put salt and pepper and garlic in it and fry a little piece to taste it whether it had enough seasoning. And like there would be like spare ribs and that, we'd can that usually.
Did you help a lot with the canning? Did you help a lot with the canning?
Oh yes, there was nobody else to help me.
What other types of how chores did you do inside the house?
Well, in the house I'd have to bake bread and cookies and kuchen and kichla and whatever we had to eat. You had to bake it because they never bought any bread or anything like that. They used to haul a truck load of wheat to Column. They had a flour mill there, and they would have their wheat ground into flour, and they'd bring it home. And that made very good bread.
You mentioned that your mom taught you how to make bread by her bedside. Who taught you how to make the cookies and the kuchen? And
Well, you did that on your own.
did the boys ever help in the house?
No, they pretty much had to clean barns and haul hay.
Did you ever have to help with the barns or the hay?
Well, in the summertime you had to help with the hay, but in the wintertime I didn't.
What type of clothes would you wear when you were doing chores?
Oh, I usually wore some of my brother's overalls because it was cold, usually.
How about laundry? How would you do laundry?
Well, we had a washing machine with a motor that it wasn't attached to the washing machine. It was separate and had a belt on it. And usually one of the boys would start the motor for you, and you had to heat your own water and put it in. And we made our own homemade soap.
How did you do that?
Oh, you took some lard or cracklings when you butchered, and you added lye to it and water, and then you stirred it until it was of the right consistency, and you made it in a crock. You put your ingredients in there, and you had a stick like a part of a broomstick or something, and you kept stirring it until it was getting thick, and then you let it set. And the next day you cut it into bars of soap.
So with lard, did you guys render your own lard?
Yes. Usually that would be like bacon grease or something like that leftover lard. The good lard that you rendered, you used for cooking.
Let's see. Your mom was ill for most of your childhood.
Yes.
Did she help with the outside chores at all?
No, she couldn't. She couldn't get down and sit on a milk stool because her back, with that one kidney, it bothered her. She couldn't get up anymore. There's always that fear that the cows would injure her.
Part of your childhood was spent during the dirty 30s. What was that like?
Well, we got married in 34 during the Deep Depression.
How did you meet your husband?
Hmm?
How did you meet your husband?
My brothers and I had gone to church on a Sunday evening. There was usually Sunday evening services, so we came in for the Sunday evening services. And as we were coming out, some young fella came up to me and said, "There's somebody that wants to talk to you." I said, "Oh." I said, "Well, where is he?" "Well, he's sitting in a car." So I went up to him, and he asked me to go along with him, and I said, "No, I have to go home with," whether he could take me home, and I said, "No, I have to go home with my brothers." So I didn't go along. Well, it's okay. The next Sunday evening, we were doing supper dishes, and the telephone rang, and it was Ben, and I answered the phone. He said, are you home?" And I said, "Yes." "Well, I'll see you in a little while." So he came to the farm and visited and sat around, and I suppose we played some rook or something. And well, so that was the beginning.
How long were you courted before you got married?
Oh, about 2, 3 years.
Okay. When going back to chores that you were doing as a child, what were some of the chores that you really hated doing?
I didn't like to feed the hogs. They were always so nasty they wouldn't get away from the trough. When you poured milk in and put ground feed in, they would step all over you and push you around.
What were some of the differences between your chores in the summer and your chores in the winter?
Well, chores were pretty much the same. Only in the winter time, like the calves would probably be out in a in a fence somewhere, and wintertime they'd be in the barn.
Were you ever hired out?
No, no, they needed me at home.
Were any of your brothers or sisters hired out?
No,
How big of a farm did you guys have?
I guess they had about 4 or 5 quarters or so.
Enough to keep the kids busy.
Yeah, enough to keep them going.
What type of a farmer was your dad?
Oh, he wanted things done right.
So what did the family home look like?
And well, this was the kitchen, and the kitchen there was a trap door where you could open that trap door. You laid it back, and then there was a stairway where you went down the cellar, where you kept all your potatoes and apples and canned goods. So you had to make trips down there. And then there was a big living room. There was an organ in there, and there was a library table, and chairs, and a davenport, and rocker. And then there was kind of a lean-to built on. It was a bedroom. And it was big enough for 2 beds and a dresser and a closet. And there was a porch where usually in the wintertime we separated our milk there on the porch, because outside it would have froze, you know. So you always had that chore of washing the separator too after separating the milk. You had to wash it every morning. And so that was about it.
So there was how many bedrooms in the house?
Just one bedroom. So my brother and I slept in a hide bed. It was a leather one with black leather on it, I remember, and had wooden arms. So we slept together until we were teenagers, I guess. And then the rest of the family used the bedroom, and the folks had a bed in the living room, and it wasn't much of a house for that many kids.
When you were growing up, how many were living in the house?
Well, I remember when my oldest brother got married, so at one time we were all there.
How old
all
were
night.
you when he got married?
Well, I was born in 15. He got married maybe in 21 or so. So I was maybe 6 years old.
So at one point then there were 11 people living in the house?
Mm-hmm.
And there was one bedroom? That's a tiny house.
Yeah, that was something else. I think they slept 3 in one bed or whatever, I don't know.
How would you guys heat the home?
Oh, they had a hard coal heater in the living room. They burned hard coal in it, and it had these little windows with icing glass where you could see the flames inside. It sat in the middle of the living room. And then in the kitchen, they used the kitchen range. They used to burn manure during the day because that was cheaper than coal. But at night, they'd put coal in there to keep it going, to keep warm.
Where would they get their coal from?
Oh, they haul it home from town when they came in on the freight.
Were there any rooms that were off limits to the children?
No, there were no rooms, hardly. Well, when they had company, the parents and their company would be in the living room, and we weren't allowed to come in.
What would the children do when your parents were entertaining?
Well, they sat and visited and sang and whatever. Usually had cookies and apples for lunch. And
Where was the bathroom?
Then we had an outhouse.
How far was it from the house?
Oh, not too far. We had a summer kitchen, and it was just behind a little ways away from the summer kitchen. In the summertime, we'd do all our cooking in the summer kitchen, so the house wouldn't heat up. And then they'd set up some beds in the kitchen to scatter it around a little more. So they would do all their eating and cooking in the summer kitchen, so the house wouldn't heat up.
Let's see here. How about baths? How often would you take a bath?
Well, usually on Saturdays, they had like a wash tub, and you could heat some water. There was a reservoir on the kitchen range, and that always had water in it, and you'd heat some on top of the stove, and that's how you took your baths.
Did you guys have a well that you would get water from?
Yes, and the house was sort of up on the hill, and the well was below the hill, so you had to carry your water up the hill. In the wintertime, it would be snowy and icy, and sometimes you'd slip and fall and spill your water. You'd have to go back for some more. In the summertime, they would butcher a lamb, and then they would hang some of that fresh meat, put it in a 3-gallon can, and to put a rope on it and hang it down the well to keep it cold.
How about a garden? Did you guys have a garden?
Yes, we always had a big garden. My dad had all kinds of fruit trees. He used to have cherries and grapes he had, and he had plums and gooseberries and choneberries. And I remember they even had strawberries one time. And all kinds of vegetables,
Since
Lots of potatoes.
since your mother was pretty ill, who was responsible for tending the garden?
Well, we all had to help put it in.
You did most of the canning of the vegetables and the fruits?
Mm-hmm.
How about sauerkraut? Did you guys make your own
Yes,
sauerkraut?
we made sauerkraut in a crock. In the wintertime, you cook sauerkraut with ham and made knäfle and mashed potatoes with it. That was a pretty good meal.
What were some of those good German dishes that you had when you were growing up?
Well, I said we had this sauerkraut dish, and then they made noodle soup. They made their own noodles. They'd butcher chicken on Saturday and then cook it up for broth. And then on Sunday, you would cook it up and take the meat out and then put your noodles in and cook them up, and you'd have noodle soup for Sunday dinner.
Who was responsible for butchering the chickens?
Well, I usually had to do it.
How would you butcher a chicken back then?
Well, cut its head off.
Did you have to do all the plucking too?
What is
Did
that?
you have to do the plucking too?
Oh, sure.
Who would usually prepare the meals when you were a child?
Well, our mother did.
Did any of the boys ever help in the kitchen?
No, they did outside work.
Let's see, how would your family eat meals? Would they dine together or
Yeah, we'd all eat together.
were there assigned seats or did you just sit wherever you
Yeah,
wanted?
everybody had their place where they sat.
Was dinner a quiet time or was it?
Then we usually would have morning worship after breakfast. Dad would read some scripture and talk about it, and we'd have prayer. Then everybody went their way.
Did you have an evening prayer after evening supper, or?
No. Oh, they usually had prayer before every meal.
What about alcohol? What was the family's attitude towards alcohol?
Well, we never had any alcohol, but they made, Dad made his own wine. He would buy some grapes in the fall of the year, these Concord grapes, and he'd make wine out of that, and then, well, we could eat some of them too. And then in the wintertime, he would buy raisins and make wine out of that.
How about root beer? Did you guys ever make root beer?
Yes, we made root beer, and we also made pop.
How would you do that?
Well, with the root beer, you bought a little bottle of extract, root beer extract, and you'd add sugar and yeast to it, and you'd mix it up, and then you'd bottle it, and after so many days, then you could drink it. And pop the same way. You would buy nectar in a bottle, like you bought the root beer extract. They had bottles of nectar. You could buy it in raspberry or strawberry or orange, so we could make our own pop that way. You added yeast and that nectar to it, and water and sugar, and that's how you made it.
What type of clothing did you wear a lot back when you were growing up?
Well, our mother usually made our clothing, so it was nothing fancy.
Did the girls wear a lot of dresses?
Yeah, they usually wore it. There were no slacks then.
How did you stay warm in the winter? What type of clothing
Well,
did
I'd
you?
say you'd slip on some of the boys' overalls to walk to school, because otherwise your stockings, you wore cotton stockings, they got wet, when you went into deep snow, and so you'd have to wear something on your legs to keep warm.
Did you have winter boots that you would wear?
Yes, you had high boots that you wore.
How about gloves and hats?
Yeah, you had the scarf, and you had a woolen cap and mittens, and keep warm.
Did you ever have to wear hand-me-down clothing?
What?
Hand-me-downs? Did you have hand-me-down clothing?
No, not really. I don't think so.
How often did you get a new pair of shoes?
When the soles were worn through, my dad was a shoemaker in the old country. So when the soles were worn through, he'd put new soles on them, so we didn't get shoes too often.
Did you ever have electricity when you were growing up?
No.
Do you remember when you first got electricity?
Oh, we got electricity after we were married. We got married in 34, and I think we got electricity in the early 50s.
What was that like? How did it change your life?
Oh, that was really something, to be able to iron with an iron and didn't have to heat them on a stove, That was improvement.
Tell me a little bit about your wedding. What was a wedding like back then?
Well, we were married in my parents' home, and all my brothers and sisters and uncles and aunts were there, and some friends. And the minister came out from town, and they, after we were married, they had a big meal of chicken and mashed potatoes and gravy and the whole bit, and cake and whatever. So we got married on a Wednesday evening, and on a Friday we moved to Heaton, North Dakota. my husband and I.
Was that a scary move for you?
Well, I had never been away from home before, so I got very homesick.
How far was that from?
Oh, about 125 miles or so.
So you didn't get back home to see your family very often?
Oh, once in a while, not too often.
Um, when you were growing up, did your family always have the Model T?
Well, as the years went by, they got better cars, and then they would trade the old one in for a newer one, and
You mentioned that you didn't have a telephone when you got married and you moved up to Heaton, but did
no.
you have one when you were growing up?
Yes, we had when we were growing up at home. We had a telephone.
What would that be used for?
Well, to call into town when somebody went and made a trip into town, if you forgot to tell them to bring something, then you could call the grocery store and tell them to include something that you'd forgotten, and call a neighbor and visit with him, and with church doings.
How about a radio? Did you have a radio when you were growing up?
We had a battery radios. You bought a big pack battery, and that's how you had radio. And when that battery lasted so long, so many months, and then you'd have to replace it, and it was worn out.
Do you remember any programmings that you would listen to when you were growing up?
Oh yeah, there was Amos and Andy and Ma Perkins and some of those.
When you would listen to the radio, was it something that you'd do as a family, or was it something that you did by yourself?
Well, you could always have the radio on as you were working along.
We talked a little bit about 4th of July, but what was Christmas time like?
Well, we usually had a Christmas program in school, and we also had one in church. And sometimes you got a new dress for Christmas, and you could wear that for the program, and you'd say your recitations and sing with somebody, and then they always packed a bag for you with nuts and candy and maybe an orange or an apple, Cracker Jack. So that, and your parents, they never bought you Christmas gifts, but you always got a bag of goodies, like nuts and candy. And
Did you have a Christmas tree when you were growing up?
no, we never had a Christmas tree at home.
Did your family ever decorate the house?
No.
Would your mom prepare a special Christmas feast for Christmas dinner?
Well, she usually made honey cookies and anise cookies for Christmas, which she didn't do during the rest of the year, but for Christmas she would make those. And molasses cookies she made, and baked kuchen, and a lot of fresh bread. We always made our own jelly out of choke cherries and gooseberries, and so there was always jelly around, and butter. We had churned our own butter.
So was Christmas time some time where the entire family, regardless of where you were, would come together?
Well, some of my brothers and sisters would come home for Christmas meal. But usually by then there would be lots of snow sometimes and they couldn't come. So you were pretty isolated.
What about Easter? How How would you celebrate Easter?
Oh, we always colored eggs and always kept Good Friday, went to church on Friday and went to church on Easter Sunday and colored eggs, had colored eggs for it and make a chicken dinner or something for Easter. So we always had enough to eat.
Would you have like an Easter egg hunt for the eggs that you would color? Or?
Oh, we just colored eggs. My mother used to cook onion peelings to make dye. And something else, I think she used beet juice, that she had pickled beets, she'd save the juice and she'd put eggs in there and dye them that way. She didn't buy any dye, they made their own. She used different, they had red onions and they had yellow onions, and so it made different colors. She'd cook the peelings, onion peelings, and that made it for a color then.
How about Valentine's Day? Did you do anything to celebrate Valentine's Day?
In school, we usually made our own Valentines, and we'd have a big Valentine box and we'd give each other Valentines for Valentine's Day.
And Halloween?
Well, years ago, they used to the younger boys would go around and do pranks to other people, tip over their outhouses and stuff like that. But I never took part in anything like that.
How about Thanksgiving? Was that something that was celebrated?
Well, we always had our own turkeys, so usually a turkey was fixed with dressing and cranberries cooked for Thanksgiving dinner. And some of my brothers and sisters would come home.
What about New Year's?
Years ago, they used to come around on New Year's night and come to your door and ask for some money or something to drink or whatever. And if you didn't have anything to give them, then they'd bring guns along and they'd make a big noise. They'd shoot their guns and make a big noise. So I was always kind of scared of it.
Okay, I'm going to ask you 3 concluding childhood questions, and then we'll go look at some of the photos and stuff that you have, okay? I'm going to ask 3 concluding little questions here, and then we'll go look at some of the photos that you have.
Okay.
First one, what was the most stressful childhood experience that you had?
Well, I think when my mother died.
How did you cope with your mother's death?
Cried and cried for homesickness.
What was your most, or what was the happiest childhood memory that you have?
Oh, Sundays we'd have a lot of company all the time. And my brother and his wife lived about a little better than a mile from our farm, and she had a sister and a brother that were about our age, and they would all come to our house, and we had a little red wagon, and we'd take rides down the hill, and that was fun.
And what was the most adventurous thing that you did as a child?
Well, I remember in the summertime, I had an aunt living near Ashley, and they had some many choke cherry trees. So one Sunday in the summertime, when the choke cherries were ripe, we'd all get in the car, and they'd take cream cans along and pails. And then we'd go to this aunt's house and have lunch there. And then we could all go out and pick choke cherries. And then we'd put them in this 10-gallon can and whatever we brought. And then we'd be cooking jelly probably the rest of the week. Make choke cherry jelly. And then she would give us supper yet before we went home. She was a great cook. And she would buy salami. I remember they had a summer kitchen, and she had this salami hanging on the wall. I thought that was so different. And she kept it hanging on the wall, and she'd take it down and slice them off and hang it back up. I thought that was really odd. I had never seen that before. But she was a great cook, and she treated us well. And she was my dad's sister. She was a real big person. She needed 2 kitchen chairs to sit on because one wouldn't have held her. She weighed over 300 pounds.
Is there anything else about your childhood that you would like to share at this time?
No, I think that's about it.
We're going to start what we call a photo album tour, and we're just going to look through the photos. So let's start with this one. Why don't you tell us what it is?
It's the couple that bought my parents this home when they left Russia.
So they actually owned their farm in Russia?
Mm-hmm.
Did your parents know this couple before they left?
I imagine so.
Do you know who they are? Did they ever tell you?
I heard it, but I forgot.
Okay. And your parents left Russia in 1910. 1910. Okay. Is there anything else that you'd like to tell us about the picture? Or?
I don't know anything particulars about it. When after my dad passed away, there was a big box of pictures, and they were all divided amongst the family. So those are some that I got, and the rest of the family, they each got some too.
Is this what a traditional wedding dress looked like?
That's what they did then, yeah.
Okay. Just sit that one right over there. Okay, and what do we have here?
Oh, this is the church that they attended over in the old country.
Do you remember the name of the church?
It was a Lutheran church, but I don't know the name of it other than that, because they were Lutheran when they lived in the old country.
Was this the church that your parents were married at?
That I don't know.
You said your parents were Lutheran when they left. How did they become Baptist here?
Well, there were some evangelists that came around here, and they had meetings, and they attended them, and then they decided to turn Baptist, I guess.
So when you were growing up, was religion really important in your family?
Oh, yeah. I had 2 brothers that were in the ministry. My younger brother, and who's still, he and I are the only ones living, and he lives in Kansas.
So are they Baptist ministers? Did they stay in the Baptist church?
Yes, they're both Baptist minister. And the older brother, David, he pastored. He lived in Nebraska. He's buried in Koepplin, Nebraska, and he passed away several years ago.
Okay.
This is my Uncle Conrad and Aunt Christine, who I lived with for a year.
This was the family that you stayed with when your
Yes.
mom was ill?
Mm-hmm.
She's the one that nursed you for a while?
No, that
okay.
was Ben's aunt that
Oh.
nursed me.
So who else is in the picture with them? Do you know who the kids are?
Well, I would know, but I see so bad I
Okay,
can't
okay.
tell you.
What was it? Was their last name Zimmerman?
Zimmerman, Conrad and Christina Zimmerman.
Where did they live when they were when you
They
were
lived about 7 miles south of town.
Were you close to them when you were
Oh
growing
yeah,
up?
we were together a lot.
What type of a uncle was Uncle Conrad?
He was very kind, nice.
Were you friends with the two daughters in the picture?
Well, they were much older than I was, but we were friends. The second daughter died on childbirth after she was married. And the older daughter, she was married to John George, and he had a John Deere implement business in Danzig, North Dakota, and a hardware store there.
Were the younger boys closer to your age?
Well, there was two, Gideon and Benny, that went into the ministry, and they went to school with me, and so did John. They went to school with me.
What were they like as boys?
Oh, they were good kids.
Would you play ball with them and the
Yes,
games
mhm.
with? Okay. Is this at their farm, you think?
Yes. Mhm. Who is that? Oh, that's Ben's uncle and aunt.
What were their names?
Mr. and Mrs. Fred Gable.
Is it G-A-B?
Goebel.
Were they German Russian as well?
Yes.
Did they live near you?
They lived in Lair here.
Okay. So after you got married to Ben, were you close to their family?
Well, yeah, their daughter had a cafe downtown, so we were together quite a bit. And he had a business downtown, had home oil company, so they sold all kinds of things, you know. He had a business in town. And they came to our went to our church also. Oh, that was. I have a big picture of that. Should I get that?
This will work perfect. This is you, your family.
Mm-hmm.
So this is Ben,
Mm-hmm.
and then you, and then
Carol and Janice.
Carol and Janice. Do you know about when this picture was taken?
Jan was born in 1939, and she was about 7 years old. So it was in the
55.
no, it was in the 40s somewhere, late 40s.
Late 40s. Okay. Did you get a lot of family photographs when you were?
No, not a lot, but the ones I'm showing you,
Okay.
because they were divided amongst 9 of us, you know.
What's the age difference between the girls?
Carol was born in 36 and Jan in 39, so it's 3 years.
Okay. And how long were you married to Ben again?
67 years. He died in 98.
What from?
He had a heart condition, and he had emphysema, and he had blockage and everything until he just couldn't live anymore. It was hard to see him go, but So he's probably gone 9 years this fall. You know,
That's the banker.
I don't know whether you want that or not.
We can't. If someone talks about the banker, then we have a picture of him.
Okay. That's Mr. and Mrs. Isidore Geet. They were good friends of my dad and mother.
They were the banker. He was the banker in Lair.
Yes.
Geet. Is that G-E-E-T?
Geiddt.
I-D-T. Okay. Banker in Lair. Did they come out and socialize with your?
Yeah,
your parents?
they come out to the farm, and we'd usually have a watermelon patch. And when the watermelon was ripe, they'd come out there on the Sunday afternoon, and they'd have a watermelon feed.
Okay. So were his children your age, or were they older?
Some of the girls were my age.
So when they would come out for the watermelon, they'd bring out the children, and the children would play. Says Jamestown, North Dakota. So would you go to Jamestown to get a photograph taken, or would they come out
yeah,
here?
I suppose they went there.
What was the trip up to Jamestown like?
Oh, about 70 miles, I guess. The girls both graduated from Jamestown College.
Really?
So we made many trips up there when they had homecoming or whatever. And Carol got her master's in Muncie, Indiana. That's where Bill got his doctor's, in Muncie, Indiana. And Jan got hers at Seattle at the university.
Okay.
She went on to school yet after they moved out there. That's Ben's uncle. Do you want that?
We probably don't need that one.
No.
This one, though, is the one... Is this the one downstairs?
Yeah.
Okay, let's do this one here, though, so we have it on camera.
Okay.
This is...
My dad's brother and his family.
Dad's brother. What was your dad's brother's name?
This was... I'm not sure.
Okay. This is the family, one of the families that remained in Russia. They never came. Was that hard for your dad to leave his brother behind?
Oh, I'm sure it was. Yeah, he had more relatives, his parents and sisters, some sisters. And
And then this is your family picture, right? Okay. Tell me how it's best. Well, just lay it down. Is that no reflection?
this is me here. My brother cut my hair the night before. He cut bangs for me, and I didn't like bangs. So I wasn't very happy camper that day.
It doesn't look like you're happy. Who would usually cut your hair when you were growing up?
This brother here.
Okay. Let's see here. Can you see well enough to identify who's in the picture?
Yes.
Okay. Let's start over here, and we'll go left to right.
All right. This is Oscar
Oscar.
and David and Amelia and Israel and Bertha and Gottlieb and Mother and myself and Jake and my dad.
So Oscar, David, Amelia, Israel, Bertha, Gottlieb. And who's this one here?
Alex.
Alex. Didn't get him. Okay. Mother, you, Jake, and Dad? Okay. You know about how old you were when this was taken?
Oh, I'd say maybe about 10, 9, 10.
Okay. You have a string of pearls on you. Did you
Oh.
always have necklaces?
Oh, I wanted to dress up, you know.
Okay. And the last one. This is now a picture of
My dad in the service and my uncle.
this was the service in Russia, right?
Yes.
The Russian
Mhm.
service. Okay, and your dad's, where's your dad?
He's got a mustache right here.
Right here, second from right.
And this is my uncle here.
Okay.
And he brought him home on furlough. That's how he met my mother.
So did this brother come to the United States as well?
Yes, they came over with them
Okay.
together. But they didn't stay here. They were here a year, I believe, and then they went on to Washington. His wife had a brother living out near Ritzville and in that area, so they moved on to Washington.
So did you get to know him at all when you
Oh,
were a
yes.
child?
Yeah, he came back to visit, and we went out there. And we saw.
You went out when you were a child to Washington?
No,
Oh, okay.
I went out after we were married. We went out to see the girls, and then we visited with his daughters. Carol had his daughters and their husbands come to the house one day when we were there. But he had already passed on then. But he came back to North Dakota to visit my mother and dad.
Okay. I think what we'll do now is I'd actually like you to film her talking about the one photo down there. Okay, what's this picture?
It's my uncle, Jacob Zimmerman, who was killed in the Russian-Japanese War.
Do you know how old he was when he died?
I have no idea.
Did that photograph come over from Russia with your dad?
Well, my uncle Gottlieb had it, and when they sold all his property, my dad bought it at his auction sale, because it was his brother, so he wanted it. He bought it at their auction sale. My uncle Gottlieb had it, and then he brought it home after his things were sold. He died, my uncle Gottlieb died very suddenly. He was out seeding flax, and he had some flax seed on the wagon box, and it was only half of the box was there. And he put some sacks of flax on there, and he went up there to straighten them out, and he fell between the wheel and the box, and the horses got scared, and they took off and went home and dragged him all the way home. So he died the next morning then, my Uncle Gottlieb. And then after that, all his household belongings and everything was sold, and my dad bought it.
What is this picture here?
That is my brother, my dad's brother and his family.
This is that picture that we looked at upstairs as
Right.
well. Did this one come over from Russia, do you know?
Well, he had that other picture, and then he had an enlargement made into this.
And then this one?
This is my mother's parents, Mr. and Mrs. Wall, W-E-H-L. This is what my mother's maiden name was.
And you never got to know them
No,
because
I
they
never got to know them.
They stayed back in Russia?
Yes.
Did your mother ever get to see them again?
No.